This next case takes us to Utah's Zion National Park, one of the oldest inhabited places in the United States. Habitation there started roughly 8,000 years ago with small family groups of Native Americans. The 229 square mile park is filled with striking rock formations with red rock cliffs. One prominent feature of the park is Zion Canyon, which is 15 miles long and reaches depths of up to 2,640 feet. Although Zion is a relatively small park as far as national parks go, with over just 147,000 acres, it is still one of the most popular in the United States. It's located in southwest Utah, and it is estimated that over 4 million people visited the park in 2019. The park's popularity can be attributed to its stunning red rock cliffs and canyons that wander on for miles. Zion is also hiker's paradise, with over 100 miles of trails winding through the park. However, Zion is not to be taken lightly. It can also be dangerous. In 2017, there were 17 search and rescue operations conducted in Zion National Park, and more recent numbers are yet unknown. One of those cases was the disappearance of a woman in her 30s named Amanda. Amanda was an experienced hiker who had visited Zion many times before. That summer, she had called her mom to tell her she was planning a solo hike in the park. This wasn't unusual for her, as she was an avid and experienced hiker and had done this kind of thing before many times, even many times at Zion, since she just lived north of Las Vegas. Her mom, however, had a bad feeling about it that day, even though she didn't know why, and she begged her not to go. Amanda assured her mom that she would be just fine. She insisted that she knew what she was doing and that she would call when she got back to cell service. But that was the last time anyone ever heard from her. The last known footage of Amanda was her hiking in the background of another hiker's video, about a mile from where her boots were ultimately found. The footage showed her walking alone on the trail, but there is no way to know what happened to her after she walked off camera. A massive search effort was launched when the young woman's mother reported her missing. The search party looked for her day and night. Flyers were posted, but they couldn't find any trace of her. They scoured the park, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. And there was no sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away from where they found her boots. It was as if she had just taken them off and walked away in her socks. Because her boots were found, though, the search party surmised that she had to be somewhere in the park. They just didn't know where. The search for Amanda went on for weeks, but no further evidence was found. Park authorities started to wonder if she had somehow left the park on her own, or if possibly someone had abducted her. But still, the boots that were found, left behind, didn't add up. Even after the official search was called off, Amanda's mother refused to give up hope. She set up her residence near the park and continued to comb the park herself day after day in the desperate hope of finding her daughter. But sadly, Amanda was never found, and her case remains unsolved. Conspiracy theorists who have honed in on the boots being left behind have postulated that she was abducted by aliens. Some theories are less far-fetched, and instead suggest that she merely took off her boots to adjust something, walked around a bit, but lost her footing and fell into one of the nearby canyons and couldn't get out. Others still believe that she was taken by a cult or a murderer who knows the park well. The list of theories goes on and on. But the truth is, no one really knows what happened to Amanda. She simply disappeared in Zion National Park, never to be seen again. If you're planning on hiking in Zion, please remember that it is a beautiful but potentially dangerous place. Stay on the trails, hike with a partner, and let someone know where you're going and when you expect to be back. Most importantly, if you see something suspicious, say something. You could save a life. This story from Los Alamos County in New Mexico was reported nearly 12 years ago. The encounter took place on September 6th of 2010. Hi, my name is Joe. I'm 20 years old, and I recently had an encounter that was definitely unexplainable. First, let me start out by telling you the story from the very beginning. I am from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the closest camp spots to me are in the Jemez Mountains. I have a friend who frequents the Jemez Mountains to go hunting and camping. A couple years ago, my buddy told me a story about an encounter he recently had in Jemez. He said that he had recently gone on a camping trip with his Uncle Mike and his family. They went to a spot in Jemez that he called the Meadow. He told me that about an hour before sundown, he and his family were at the camp spot, and they could all hear a huge shrieking sound, approximately 300 or 400 yards away. He told me that the sound had lasted for about 30 seconds to a minute. As he told me this, he asked me the question, "What kind of animal do you know has the lung capacity to hold a call for that amount of time?" He and his family were sitting around the campfire at sundown. He told me he could see the sky, and there was just enough light out to see in between the trees on the ridge. The meadow is in a small valley with 2 ridges on either side of the camp spot. As everyone was sitting around the campfire, he told me that he would look up at the ridge and see something walk upright in between the trees. He told me the being would walk back and forth in between trees until sundown. He said he didn't call attention to the thing because his girlfriend and sisters were camping there, and he didn't want to cause a scare. He and his family go to sleep, but are awakened in the middle of the night to the shrieking sound. Only this time the shrieking sound is up on one of the ridges. He said the sound was so loud that he could literally feel the bass of the sound. This shriek lasted about 1.5 minutes, as he described it. I was very interested in this, and my friend told me that the spot was originally his Uncle Mike's camp spot from when he was a little kid. I talked to his Uncle Mike about the story. Uncle Mike is a backwoods hunter-camper who has been all over the country to hunt. When I talked to Mike, he was genuinely afraid of the camp spot. He told me that he had been experiencing strange things in this camp spot since he was a young boy. He recalled a time when he was 7, and he was camping with his brother and his mother. He said that whatever was out there scared his mother so bad that she packed camp in the middle of the night and left. He told me he wouldn't go back. My friend and I eventually persuaded him to go camping with us. So last summer, my friend, Uncle Mike, my friend's Uncle Richard, and myself went to the very camp spot where the noises were heard. We stayed 5 nights and heard nothing. There were noises, but nothing definite. Well, about a month ago, I took my girlfriend to the camp spot, and we stayed a few nights and heard nothing. This past weekend was Labor Day, and so I took my girlfriend once again to this camp spot and had a very terrifying, unexplainable experience. The first night was a great night with nothing out of the ordinary. The second night was something else. My friend was camping miles away, so we went and visited him. It was getting dark, so I told my girlfriend that we needed to get back to camp. I drove sort of hastily back to camp, and when we arrived, I started the fire immediately. After I started the fire, my girlfriend and I sat by it, and I felt extremely tense, but I didn't know why. And then this went on for about an hour, until my girlfriend got irritated with me. I told her I just wanted to go to bed. I packed a lot of wood on the fire, and we crawled into the back of my Hummer, and we went to sleep. Now, before I go on, I want to give you a description of the campsite. I was parked facing away from the entrance of the site. There was a canopy directly behind the vehicle. Underneath the canopy was my backpack and the garbage bag that did have some garbage in it. The campfire was about 15 feet away from the canopy with 2 chairs next to it. So we were lying with our heads facing the back of the vehicle, and my girlfriend is to the left of me. We go to sleep in the back of the vehicle. Sometime later, I wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm very groggy. I'm looking up at the ceiling of the vehicle and I can see a slight glow of the fire, and then it goes out moments later. Immediately after the light goes out, I hear something rub up against the vehicle on my side. I hear it until I can hear it knock over a shovel and 2 fishing poles. My adrenaline starts going fast. I don't wake my girlfriend up, though, because I didn't want to scare her. I listened to this thing for about 10 minutes. It was very dark at this point, and there was no moon out. After about 15 minutes total, I hear the thing rub up against the vehicle again. And at this point, I grab my girlfriend by the back of the neck and I say in a whispering voice, "I need you to listen to me carefully. There's something outside the Hummer. I don't know what it is. I don't know how big it is, but something is out there, and I'm going to get the gun." She gasps, says okay, and I reach for my 9mm and turn off safety. I lay there clinching my gun and her, and I listen to the thing raise hell outside. I hear what sounds like tearing of cloth, ripping of the trash, and big footsteps and grunts. My girlfriend tells me to calm down because she can feel me trembling. Every time my girlfriend and I hear a noise, though, we clinch each other because we were hearing the same thing. We lie there listening to the noises for what feels like 20 minutes before I can start to calm down at all. At this point, I had accepted the fact that there was a bear outside my vehicle, and it was getting what it was after. The sounds are coming from next to the campfire now. I hear the chairs fall over, and eventually the sounds come close to the vehicle again. A couple of times I would post up on my arm to see if I could figure out what it was, but it's too dark to see anything. The only thing I can make out is the end of the tree line. The sky was just a little brighter than the trees, and I could also see a small glowing of embers from the campfire, but not enough to light anything else up. I couldn't see anything, but the noises continued. I can remember saying to my girlfriend, "Our spot is going to be a mess in the morning." I was trying to calm my girlfriend down because at this point she wanted to leave. Eventually the noises started coming from her side of the vehicle. On that side was the ice chest and the dry box, both full of food. It's tampering with them, and it sounds like it dumped the ice out of the chest. I turned to my girlfriend and I said, "There went the ice chest." These noises continued for probably about 5 minutes, and at this point I was sitting up on my heels looking out the window, but could still see nothing. The next thing I hear is it touches the vehicle, and a second later I hear a clang. The sound was very distinct. It was the sound of the breaking of the canopy hitting the ground. I was looking out the back window and could see the sky now. It had knocked over the canopy. I say to my girlfriend, "Oh my God, it just knocked over the canopy." And in my head I can picture a bear climbing up onto the bracing of the canopy and collapsing it where it stood. My girlfriend says, "Did you see that thing?" Assuming that she was asking if I could see it, and I said, "No, I can't see anything." And then she starts crying hysterically, but not too loud. She says, "I'm not okay. I want to leave now." And I said, "Okay." I clench my gun as I crawl into the driver's seat. I sit for a couple of seconds before I started the vehicle because I didn't know what would happen when I did. And then I start the vehicle, I head forward, and then I turn right to make a U-turn and drive out of there. I see no kind of animal or living thing. I drive about 10 minutes until I hit the main road. I park there, and my girlfriend is still in the back, crying. I crawled back there with her to console her. We slept a little on the main road until sunrise. And then we both woke about 7:30 in the morning and started talking about it. And it was then that she said, "I saw the thing." I said, "What?" She said, "Don't you remember me saying, 'Did you see it?'" And I said, "Yeah." And she went on to tell me that she saw it. Keep in mind, she was lying down the entire time and refused to sit up. She said she was lying down looking up at the sky, which was lighter than everything else. She was looking out the side window, which was where it was at the end. She said as soon as the canopy hit the ground, she saw something black fly past the window. She said it was taller than the top of the window and headed back the direction it had originally come from, which just so happened to be away from all of the main roads. My Hummer's about 6 feet, and if she was lying down looking up and saw something taller than the top of the window, well, whatever it was had to have been 7 feet plus. After our conversation, we agreed to go back up to the camp spot to collect our things, which was the canopy, the chairs, the cooler, the dry box, the shovel, and the fishing poles. Oh, and my backpack in the garbage. We head back up to the camp spot and finally arrive. I was chilled to the bone when we arrived. There was not a thing out of place. There were only two things visibly wrong with the camp spot. The chairs were knocked over, and the canopy was turned upside down about 20 feet from where it had been standing. I want you to know that there was no wind that night. Now, if a bear got to this canopy, it would have been collapsed and torn. But what this meant to me was that whatever knocked over my canopy had to have picked it up and then thrown it 20 feet away. I put on my shoes, which I had left there the night before, and started scouring the area. The trash, which was open and not tied the night before, wasn't tampered with. My backpack was right where I left it. The cooler and the dry box were in the exact same spot, and we never really took an inventory of their contents the night prior, so you couldn't exactly tell if anything was missing. This scared the hell out of me, because it meant that whatever was there had the dexterity to rummage through everything and do whatever it did, and then leave it the way it was found. We packed up and left. I want whoever reads this to know that I don't drink and I have never touched drugs. What happened to me that night was not just the wind, but it was very, very real. I've never before in my life felt terror like that, and numerous times through writing to you, I have broken out in tears because I hate to relive it. There are only certain people that I've even told this story to because I don't want to sound crazy. I really hope I hear from you so I can attempt to make some sense of what I've been through. When I first heard my friends' stories, I didn't doubt them, and they made me very curious. But going there, to the campsite, 3 times and not experiencing anything just made me think whatever it was no longer up there. I know better now, and I'll never return. It happened in the town of St. Augustine, Florida in 1972. One night I was working the midnight shift. I was dispatched to a call of a possible prowler at an old abandoned house near the beach. The dispatcher said that supposedly no one had lived in the house for years and that it was thought by locals to be haunted. Well, I arrived at the location, looked around for a while, but found no sign of anyone. Thinking I might have been called to the area for nothing, I decided to cruise around town for a while, just checking it out, before returning to the station. As I drove by what we called the sand dunes, something caught my eye in the middle of the road ahead. It looked like a pile of rags or clothes in the middle of the road, so I slowed down as I approached it so that I could avoid hitting it. Then suddenly, this thing stood up on 2 legs, and it stood there looking at me with glowing red eyes. It was about 5 feet 9 inches tall and very thin, with long arms that hung way past its knees. It stood there and watched me as I drove past at about 35 miles an hour. And when I reached the next intersection, I turned around and headed back towards it just to see what was going on. But as I approached the area again, it was gone. But there was no place for it to go, to hide. This thing seemed to literally disappear into thin air. I drove up and down the streets in that area for a while looking for it, but I never found any further traces. And then the following day, another officer and I returned to the abandoned house on the beach where the original call had come from. We walked around the house looking for any signs of a prowler or anything unusual when we heard something approaching in the sand behind us. We both turned around at exactly the same time to see this thing standing there watching us, the thing with glowing red eyes. It was about 20 feet away. It stood there watching us for about 30 seconds before suddenly taking 2 giant steps towards us before stopping. And then it took another 2 steps, and then it stopped again. And it continued this slow, deliberate movement towards us for another 30 seconds before suddenly taking off in this amazing burst of speed. I mean, it literally disappeared into thin air as it ran off into the distance. We both stood there in total amazement at what we had just seen. There was no doubt in my mind that it was exactly the same creature I had seen the night before. After talking to several people who lived in the area, I learned that this house on the beach where we had the encounter was known by many to be haunted, and no one ever wanted to enter the house or check out any of the strange noises purported to come from inside. So, with nothing to go on but our word of mouth, the case was dropped. And then several years later, a local TV station did a special on this house and its supposed haunting. They brought in an expert who used electronic equipment to try and pick up any unusual activity or spirits inside the house. He captured some very strange sounds on his equipment, but when he played them back, skeptics claimed that they were just birds or other natural ocean noises picked up by the equipment. I've always wondered if what we saw that night was a ghost or something else. Whatever it was definitely not of this world. It had glowing red eyes and could basically disappear into thin air. I mean, it moved so slowly towards us that we did have plenty of time to observe it, and we know what we saw. The only thing I can think of is that maybe it was some type of a primate or hominid that lived in Florida thousands of years ago before modern man arrived here. But whatever it was, I know for sure that it wasn't human. I often wonder if there are more like it out there. Have any of you seen anything similar? There is no shortage of strange things that happen when you are a police officer. It was June of 2017, and I was working the midnight shift. My partner and I were dispatched to a domestic disturbance call in the small town near where I worked outside of Albany, New York. We arrived at the address, but there was no one outside, and nobody answered the door either. We then went across the street to speak to the neighbor who was standing on their front porch watching us. We thought possibly the person who called it in. The neighbor told us that the couple had been making strange gestures at each other, and that the man looked like he was trying to tie his wife to the porch railing, all while someone from the back seat of the car kept yelling out to them. The neighbor also said that they had left in their car about 10 minutes before we arrived, and then he described the car to us, an older gray Toyota with a wrecked front fender. We then drove around the area looking for the vehicle, but we couldn't locate it anywhere. Just then we got another call from dispatch. The dispatcher then informed us that someone had called back saying that the couple was now back home. So we drove back to the house, which wasn't far because of the town being so small, and we saw them sitting in the Toyota in the driveway. The husband was in the driver's seat, his wife was in the passenger seat, and there was another woman in the back seat whom we couldn't see clearly because she was leaning forward with her head down, as if she was trying to hide from us or hide something from us. We then got the couple to exit the vehicle and spoke with each of them separately to find out that they had been drinking heavily all day long at the local bar. They also admitted that they had been smoking marijuana all day too. The husband told us that he and his wife had been arguing because she wanted to go home with their friend in the back seat, and he was determined to keep her home with him. He said that he didn't want her to leave with their friend because he believed that the friend was a witch and was casting spells on him. He said that he had believed the woman had put a spell on his wife, too, which is why she wanted to leave with her in the first place. We then walked over to the car and spoke with the woman in the back seat, who turned out to be a close family friend of theirs. She denied having any knowledge of witchcraft or casting spells on anyone. She said he was crazy and that he always acted like that when he was drinking and smoking. We then asked her if she could step out of the car so we could speak with her directly, but she refused, saying that there were too many police officers and it was making her nervous. But she finally agreed to get out of the car after we assured her that we just needed to ask her a few questions and that we would then let her go home. But as soon as she stepped out of the car, she began to frantically look around. She told us that she needed to go home now, and she quickly walked away. We had nothing to detain her on, so we just watched her as she walked down the driveway into the street and eventually disappeared behind a large tree at the end of the block. We were both very suspicious as to why she left so abruptly, But we continued speaking with the husband, who, too, was now becoming increasingly agitated. He told us now that he wanted his wife arrested because he believed that she had cast this spell on him, which was causing him to have an erection for several days, and he thought she was controlling his mind. But he also admitted to thinking that it might have been the marijuana that they had been smoking all day, and that could have made him believe in the witchcraft. He was basically all over the place, not of sane mind. But he became so upset at this point that we decided it would be best for them to go inside their house and calm down before we spoke with them again in the future about anybody pressing charges or anything like that. So we watched as he and his wife walked up the front steps and into their house. And as we were walking back to our patrol car, I looked over to their vehicle again, and I saw the woman who had just left. She was now standing behind their car, looking directly at us. But she was looking like she was hiding and thinking that we didn't see her. I pointed her out to my partner, and we both watched as she slowly slunk back around the car and disappeared from view again. So we just got into our patrol cars, drove towards where we had originally seen her walk off. Still no sign of her. We decided to go back and do a quick drive-by past their house after circling the block to just check on them. The car was still there, and they weren't outside, but the front door was now open. We sat there a while, maybe 15 minutes, just watching, but the front door never shut. So I walked up to it and called to them inside the house. The lights were on, but there was no answer. I then stepped up into the doorway and looked around. There on the table in the living room, I could see a large butcher knife with what looked like blood on it. We immediately called for backup because now there was evidence that someone may have been hurt with what looked like a bloody knife inside the home. Backup officers arrived within minutes, and we all began searching for them, but nothing turned up. No trails of blood, nothing out of place, nothing strange in the house, which was strange. We also checked the hospital for anybody matching their description or anyone being brought in with a knife wound, but nobody matched their description. And nobody was admitted to any of the hospitals within 50 miles with a knife wound that night. We were all so puzzled as to where they could have gone, especially to disappear without a trace. And with leaving the car in the driveway, it was all so strange. So we had no choice but to head back to the station and file the report, open the case. As I sat there writing it up, I just couldn't get the strangeness of it all out of my head. I mean, these cases can be weird, but something about this one just didn't add up. I could sense that something was not right. So the days continued. No more information was coming in. But a few days later, I received a call from my partner who told me that he had just found out that the missing couple had been found dead in their home, both laying on their backs, with their arms crossed on their chests, shoved into a basement crawl space. They had both died from stab wounds to the chest, but the husband's injuries were in the shape of a star, and the woman's in the shape of a triangle. It looked as if the initial stabs killed them, and then the killer continued to stab to create these shapes on their bodies. Instantly, the two of us thought of the strange woman in the back seat, and how she had left. But then we had seen her return before disappearing again, and it was so strange. This was definitely one of those calls that stay with you for a long, long time. I still have no idea what happened that night or how they disappeared so quickly after we arrived at their home. I'm thinking that they were already dead at that point, but how did it happen so fast and without any evidence? I am very sure that something strange happened that day and that this wasn't your basic, or dare I say, normal domestic disturbance call. I'll never know if witchcraft or demons were involved, but I do believe now more than ever before that there's an evil out there that we as police officers need to be prepared for. Be safe, brothers and sisters, and God bless you all. It was the fall of 1975, and I was about 20 years old at the time and living in Oregon. On this particular day in question, my friends and I were hunting squirrels, coon, and deer in my grandparents' farm that was east of Portland, towards Mount Hood. Our plan was to hunt all day with a couple of our dogs. So the night before, my friends slept over so that we could get to bed early. When we hunted, we liked to get up early, actually before sunrise, and head out while the forest activity was high. But when we woke up, we barely ate and we headed straight out for the woods, right at the edge of the property. We'd only been out that morning for about an hour, though, when one of our dogs started barking like crazy at the edge of the woods across from us. And then the second dog ran over and joined the first. The dogs wouldn't quit barking no matter what we said or what we did, so me and my friend Randy, we went over to investigate what could be riling up our hounds like this. Hunting dogs don't normally get spooked, so this was really weird. And because it was only just starting to get light out, we couldn't see too good from the distance we were at. Stupidly, we sat down our gear before walking over towards them. As we approached the edge of the woods where they were barking, I noticed a strange shadow in the trees, straight ahead of where the dogs were pointing towards. As I got closer, I could see something looking back at us through a gap in the trees about 30 yards away. A dark, rough-looking figure. My first thoughts were that the thing was huge. Its head must have been 2 feet above mine, and I was 5'10" at the time. The creature just stood there staring at us, staring as if it did not care that we were standing there watching it. It also didn't seem at all to be bothered by the dogs barking at it. And to be honest, the fact that it wasn't afraid of hunting dogs made me really afraid. At first glance, its hair looked brown, but upon closer look, you could see different shades of reddish-brown blotches on the body, along with white hairs here and there. There were also some patches where the fur was missing, and you could see skin, like in a mangy kind of a way. I remember wondering if it was somehow sick, and that's what had brought it out. The skin you could see looked pale in color, except for the skin around the eye area, which was darker. Its face was a flat black with a black protruding nose, and it had a huge fang-filled mouth. Also, now that we were closer, it did seem pissed off by the dogs barking. It would raise its arms and wave them around every time the dogs barked. It didn't look scared. It looked mad. After 5 minutes or so of us watching it as it watched the dogs bark, the creature turned to the side, still staring right at us, mind you, and walked into the brush without making a sound. And that's when we all took off running back home. When we got home, I told everybody what had happened, but nobody believed me. I think possibly because I have a reputation for telling wild stories. But my friends were backing me up, so no idea what happened there. I guess I had cried wolf too many times in my life. So I had no choice but to settle back into normal life, and did that for a few days. But then a few days later, another friend named Mike came over and asked to hunt with me. He said he'd heard the story about me seeing something while hunting earlier in the week, and he was excited thinking he could see it too. I didn't want to go, but I reluctantly agreed, basically thinking that it could help bolster my story. And so the next morning, the two of us headed out. Again, we headed out early and headed to the same spot. I didn't really want to bring the dogs this time. I wanted it to be quiet. But the truth is, I was too scared not to bring them. And don't you know, it didn't take long before they started barking like crazy. And then just as quickly as they started, they stopped barking and came running back towards us, looking like they had been chased by something. It was pitch black dark, so we couldn't see anything at first, but then this huge shadow appeared in the early morning light, walking towards us from the trees about 20 feet from where we stood, and it began to slowly emerge into the clearing. At this point, I realized what it was, and my heart started beating so fast because it was twice the size that I had originally thought. And this time the thing did not stop walking forward. And when it was totally out in the open, it puffed its chest as it walked into full view, and I got a really good sense of its size. But the weird thing is that it was looking down at the ground, and it never looked up or made any kind of sound. It was as if it didn't know we were there. Or maybe it knew, but didn't want to let us know it was aware. This time I knew for sure what it was. It was a Sasquatch, or werewolf, or Bigfoot. Anyway, whatever it was exactly, I don't know. But its hair looked reddish-brown with the white hairs like before, and the skin was pale, and the same flat face and fang-filled mouth, an insane look to it. The only thing different this time was that it seemed to be limping as if its right leg was hurt. All of a sudden it stopped walking and just stood there looking down at its leg, foot for a couple of seconds, and then it slowly reached down with both arms and grabbed a hold of its ankle, and it just stayed in that position. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen, as if everything up until now wasn't strange. At that moment, Mike and I both freaked out and took advantage of it stopping its advance. We ran as fast as we could back to the house. Everybody was there anxiously waiting to see what we had found because they had heard us screaming bloody murder on our way back. We didn't even realize we had been screaming until they told us. It was like one of those situations where you're not really in your body and your anxiety just takes a hold. It took us a while to calm down enough to tell them the details of what we had seen. Mike later admitted to me that he never really believed me either, and that he was planning on making fun of me for telling the lie. But now, he's my biggest ally. It was the craziest thing that's ever happened to me or any of my friends, and we're still not sure what to make of it. Thank God none of us have ever seen anything like it again. But then again, we've never gone back hunting out there since that week back in 1975. These next two stories come to us from Pennsylvania farmland, where in some cases family history can easily be traced back over 150 years, places where stories of strange experiences and unexplained sightings are recounted with every generation. This is an area of true believers in the supernatural. I'm writing in to talk to you about the creepiest thing that ever happened to me in my entire life. It was 1995, I was 15 years old, and my family had just moved to a new farmhouse in the countryside in the middle of Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes outside of State College, where my parents met while they both went to Penn State. My parents had saved up and bought this farm, which had always been their dream, so we had lots of land to roam around on. I actually loved it too. It was fun exploring all the woods and the fields behind our house. I was an only kid, too, their only son, so the outdoors became my friend, so to speak. One day I decided to go hiking through some trails in the woods behind the house. There were many trails that went through the woods, and it was easy to get turned around if you didn't pay attention, so I made sure to mark my trail with sticks as I went along. It was a warm summer day, so I wore shorts and a t-shirt with my hiking boots and good socks. I felt prepared. I walked for about 30 minutes before coming up on a small clearing with an old stone fire pit in the middle of it. This was weird, but I figured that the last people who lived there had probably built it. But what was strange was that the area looked like someone had been camping there recently, because there were empty cans and other trash lying around, but no signs of any actual people. So I continued on my way, thinking I would just tell my mom and dad about it and continue to mark my path with more sticks as I went along. And then about another 30 minutes of hiking later, I came up on a much larger clearing with a stream running through it. This was the biggest open area in the woods, and it was easy to see that no one had been there recently because it was covered in leaves, and it looked like no one had walked there in quite some time. The stream made a big bend around the edge of the clearing, so you couldn't follow it into the distance from where you first entered. So again, being careful not to get lost, I marked more sticks as I went along and started walking around the edge of the clearing towards the other side. As I got closer to the water, I noticed something odd about the water in the stream. It seemed to be moving faster than normal for this time of year, and there were things floating in it that shouldn't have been there, like a lot of twigs and leaves. But what really caught my eye were 2 dead deer carcasses lying on the opposite side of the stream. They were both in pretty good shape. I mean, as far as a dead deer can be, and I couldn't figure out why they would have died there. So I decided to cross the stream where the water was moving the slowest to see if I could get a closer look at them. As I got close to the first deer, I noticed that it had been gutted from the bottom up to its chest cavity. But whoever did it was terrible at their job because all of the guts were still inside. It was literally like it had been split open for no reason, which was such a shame. The second deer was in almost the same condition as the first one, except that its head had been removed completely and was nowhere to be found. I thought this was really strange and was totally creeped out now. No good hunter would do anything like this, so I knew something was really wrong out there. I instantly turned around and started retracing my steps back along the stream, but my anxiety continued to build even as I was walking back. I felt like I was being watched, and every so often I would look over my shoulder to see if anyone was there. But all I could see were trees, the water, and more woods. Nothing particularly scary. Then as I came around to where the largest clearing was, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There, on a tree right next to where I had crossed the stream, was the deer head that was missing from the second deer. It was stuck on a tree with a knife through its jaw. There was no way I could have missed this earlier. I was so scared at this point that I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could, but as I looked around for my sticks marking my path, they were now gone. So in my fear, I ran as fast as I could back in the direction that I had hoped was home. I think my brain just knew what to do instinctively because luckily I made it back home safely, which is a miracle as far as I'm concerned. When I got there, I ran into the house and told my parents everything that had happened. They looked at each other with a look I've never seen, and then my dad got a gun and went out to the area to look for me. He said he knew the area I was talking about. He was gone for what seemed like forever, and my mom and I sat on the porch anxiously waiting for him to get back. It seemed like forever, but my mom just kept telling me that if anybody could figure this out, it would be Dad. I was so relieved when he did come back safely that I cried. He said he found all of my sticks marking my path, but the head on the tree was gone. Or at least he couldn't find the exact tree, but he thinks he did based on my description and the leaves being all rustled around at the base of it. He said that someone must have come by while I was back home and taken it off. He did believe me, though, which was a total relief. Even though my dad would periodically go out and check that area from then on, he never found any concrete evidence of what had happened, and nothing further ever materialized. I even overheard him telling my mom that the trash I mentioned that was all around that fire pit was cleaned up, and he didn't do it, and he couldn't figure out how people were getting out there. I think he even sounded really concerned when he said it. I remember thinking, well, what if it isn't people? So now it's been 25 plus years since this happened, but every time I think about it, it makes my skin crawl again, like it's that same day. What do you think happened out there? Was there a Bigfoot or some other animal, or maybe a human? Or could it have been something more sinister, like a skinwalker? Every answer is just as scary to me as the next. I mean, I never did see anything alive out there, just the 2 dead deer, but that was enough for me to never go back out there again. It's strange for me to think, but for weeks before it happened, I had been begging to be allowed to sleep in Jimmy's treehouse. But after that night, and after we saw what we saw, neither of us ever went up there again. To call it just a treehouse doesn't really give an impression of what it was like. When I say treehouse, most people think of a rickety platform nailed together using a few pieces of wood and some badly hammered nails. But this wasn't that. Jimmy's dad was a professional carpenter. When he wasn't working on people's kitchens or laying their floors, he spent his time in the old oak tree in their backyard, with the best and coolest treehouse you've ever seen. The fact is, it was actually bigger and a whole lot nicer than some people's actual bedrooms. The whole thing was perfectly sealed up, and there were big windows on either side, so you could see for miles around, and there was a rope ladder you could climb up to get in. Inside, the floor was sanded, and Jimmy's dad had put down an old Turkish rug he'd bought at a garage sale. It covered almost the whole floor. There was also an extension cord rigged to an outdoor plug. The cord had been pinned to the back of the side of the tree and then all the way up the trunk, and then it snaked in the window so you could have a lamp or a radio up there. I guess you could have had a TV, too, if Jimmy's dad had trusted us to carry one all the way up there. But obviously, he didn't. Not that we needed one. Most of the time we were up there, we would just hang out and do boy stuff, reading comics, talking about girls and school, and sometimes in the evening trying to scare each other with bogus ghost stories. What we really wanted to do, though, what had become a bit of an obsession for us over that summer, was to camp out all night long, to pack up a ton of snacks and some sleeping bags, and spend the night swapping stories and sleeping on the old dusty rug. It wasn't much of an adventure, but in our 12-year-old minds it was everything. So I pestered and pestered my parents until finally, provided I stuck to a list of their conditions, they gave in and said yes. I remember I was so excited, sitting up there and watching the sun go down, feeling the summer air turn cool as night. I felt like I was doing something really grown up and cool. It's funny to admit that now, but it's true. It's also true that for the first time that night, Jimmy's stupid ghost stories actually had some effect on me. Usually his stories were lame, and in the bright afternoon sunshine they were more than easy to shake off and dismiss as phony and stupid. But at night, when all you could hear was the sound of the wind and the leaves and the odd creak from the boards below us, suddenly they seemed far more real, more potent. I remember noticing how even as he told the stories, Jimmy's own voice started to change. It became lower, quieter, as if he was telling me a secret that he didn't want anyone outside of the treehouse to hear. I remember, too, that even though he was the one telling the story, his eyes kept shifting around, as if he was searching the corners of the treehouse and the darker spaces for the very things he was bringing up from his imagination. Every once in a while his voice would crack, and I could tell that he was actually succeeding in scaring himself too. I'll be honest and admit that when he suggested we might want to get some shut-eye, I was actually relieved. I huddled under my sleeping bag and the blankets Jimmy's dad had given us, and I tried to drift off, wishing at least a little bit that Jimmy had left the flashlight on. I guess it was about a half an hour after that, when I'd been dozing just a little, that the first sounds came. At first I figured it must just be a raccoon or a dog or something nuzzling around in the brush, and then the trees at the end of Jimmy's garden were waving, and then I heard the branches rustling and snapping. They were breaking underfoot. Something was moving around, and right away I knew that whatever it was far bigger and heavier than a raccoon or a dog. It was at that point that I got a little scared. I woke Jimmy up. I told him what I'd heard and that it sounded like footsteps. At first, I actually worried it might be a person, some creep watching us from below, and I decided that whatever happened, we had to look over the edge and check. Slowly, and as quietly as I could, trying not to make the boards creak at all, I got up to my knees and I looked out one of the glassless windows. At first I couldn't see anything, just the line of trees, the edge of Jimmy's lawn and the moon. But then, from somewhere just to the left of the tree line, I saw a shadow stretched out across the grass, shining from the moonlight. A shadow that I swear was not of a man, although it was standing on 2 legs. A few moments later I heard a new sound, a sort of a quick, repetitive snort, the kind of quick, stabbing breaths that a dog takes through its nose when it's sniffing or searching for a scent. A moment later, I saw exactly why that sound seemed so much like a dog. Shifting my position and rising up a little higher, I peered straight down over the edge of the platform, over the huge branches onto which the treehouse was attached. What I saw made my heart race. Staring up at me only a few feet below the platform itself were two immense yellow eyes, deep set into a feral, canine head, wider and broader than any dog I've ever seen. Worse still was that this enormous head, sporting powerful, murderous-looking jaws and a row of jagged fangs, was attached not to the body of a huge dog, but to the neck, shoulders, and thick, heavily muscled arms of a man. Whatever it was that was staring hungrily up at me, it was standing on 2 feet, not stretched up on its hind legs like a dog, but upright on its 2 legs. Its torso was not a set of 4 paws, but a chest and arms, each ending in huge spade-like hands sporting massive claws. It was not a dog, or a man, but something between the two, and larger than either. Staring up at us, its nose twitching furiously at the aroma of our food, its head came to within 2 or 3 feet of the bottom of the platform, which I'm guessing must have been at least 10 or 12 feet in the air. Of course, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I screamed from the pit of my stomach, loud enough to wake the dead, and more importantly, to wake Jimmy's father. Soon we saw the light turn on in his bedroom and then the back door of the house opening quickly. We watched as he ran into the yard wearing only his boxers in a mad panic. But by the time he got to us, the thing was gone. Scared off, or maybe discouraged by my scream, it had bounded away, running on 2 legs in a way that seemed so natural. It was scary. When I asked Jimmy if he had seen it too, at first he was quiet and reluctant to say anything, but I could tell immediately that he'd definitely seen something. I could tell not only by the wild look in his eyes, but by the fact that he could do nothing but stammer. It's been 3 years since the encounter, and we've never talked about that night. We've both seen and read reports about other sightings of dogmen, but we don't discuss it. It's one of a list of things we don't do anymore. That list also includes telling ghost stories and asking to stay in the treehouse at night. If you're going to be a paperboy, you can't be afraid of the dark. I never was until the day I found out just what could be hiding in the dark. People think, because they've seen it in movies, that being a paperboy just involves screaming around the neighborhood on a bicycle and throwing rolled-up papers randomly at houses. They also think, because it happens this way in movies, that a paper route is something you do in the bright sunshine and in broad daylight. Those people have clearly never tried delivering papers like I had to in my part of the country. Up here, in the fall and winter, the sun only comes up around 9 a.m., and the mornings are as dark and foggy as they are cold. But here, people want their papers by the time they wake up. If we deliver at midday like paper boys in the movies, most people would already have gone to work and be calling into the press offices complaining about where their missing papers are. A paper route, where I'm from, starts at 6 in the morning, which means I'm getting up at 5 in order to get ready and ride down to the newspaper office to collect the copies and double-check all of the paperwork. My route, which I did on my bike, took around 2 hours. It took extra long because when I arrived at a house to do a delivery, I had to get off my bike, walk up to the porch, put it in its spot. With the weather and winter and fall being what they were up here, anything you threw on the lawn was going to be ruined by the time the owner got around to reading it. This particular story happened in the fall, around 10 years ago when I was 14. I was about halfway finished with my route at the time. I had picked up the copies in the early morning, had dropped one off at each of the houses in the first part of the neighborhood, and I was well on my way to being finished, long before the sun came up. Usually the dark didn't bother me. There were street lights, and most houses in our neighborhood had porch lights, but for some reason that morning, things felt different. Somehow, as I rode around that day, I felt like I was carrying more than my paper bag. With every corner I took, skirting by the woods that fringed the neighborhood, I got the feeling that I was also carrying the weight of someone's glare. It's a hard thing to explain, but it's as if I could physically feel eyes weighing heavy on me. Every time I got off the bike, the feeling would get stronger, and more than once I glanced around, looking for someone approaching, and listening for footsteps. There never was anything, until there was. What creeps me out most about what happened, more so than seeing the thing I saw, is the idea that there was planning behind it. Sure, I got off the bike at every house, sometimes leaving the bike on the street corner if there were 2 or 3 to do on that block, but most of the time I was never more than 100 yards from the bike. That was true of every house, except for one. Woodgrove. Woodgrove was a house right near the end of my route, and it was different. And because it was different, it was also a pain in the butt. The folks who owned Woodgrove, a huge house that set back from the road, were British. They'd moved to the States years ago, but had never gotten used to the idea of having a mailbox at the end of their driveway. Instead, they had a letterbox, a little flap in their front door, through which they expected all of their mail and their morning paper to be delivered. To be fair, the old couple who lived at Woodgrove were nice people. They had specifically asked my boss, Mr. Plummer, if the paper boy, me, would mind sticking the paper through the flap, the letterbox. I actually didn't mind, especially because the Woodgrove couple gave a huge tip on Christmas and Thanksgiving, and candy on Halloween. The point is, though, that this was the furthest I would ever be on the route from my bike, and whatever was watching me knew that. That means it had planned ahead and had been watching me for a while. I had laid my bike down as usual, and I was on my way to the door when I heard a sound behind me. Already feeling a little nervous, I glanced up at the glass patio covering Woodgrove's front door, and right away, there in the reflection, I saw it. Whether the thing should be called a werewolf or a dogman, I don't know, but it fits the profile for both. If I had to guess, I'd say the thing was around 7 feet tall. It stood partially hidden behind a tree, covered all over with thick, shaggy hair that hung down around the legs and lower arms. Its body was like that of a very muscular man, but the head was a dog's. Pointed ears, a long snout, a pink tongue above which huge canine teeth stabbed horribly downward. And its neck sloped down in shoulders in an upturned V, thick as a man's waist around. It was a sinewy knot of muscles and tendons, all designed for leverage and power. Maybe the worst of all were the eyes. Deep set on either side of a long muzzle, they were dark and gleamed with what looked like yellow or amber. Whatever the color, they were fixed, staring with a clear intent on me. At first I froze, and then with lightning speed I began to weigh my options. It has seen me, I thought, but it doesn't know that I've seen it. The fact that I saw it in the reflection rather than as I returned to my bike probably saved my life. If I had gone back for the bike, had not seen that thing first, lurking and waiting, then I would have had no chance. So instead of running back for my bike, I sprinted forwards down the side of Woodgrove, through their yard, over their back fence, and out to the street behind. I had a huge head start. I knew the route, the obstacles, and the blind corners where it wouldn't know in which direction I went. I ran, leapt, and I climbed faster than I ever have in my life. Yet still, with every single step, I felt that the thing was behind me. I imagined its claws grasping at my legs, its jaws at my heels. And even though I wasn't sure what it was, I instinctively knew it would be quicker, stronger than me. As I ran through the familiar streets of my neighborhood towards home, my heart pounding in my chest and fear surging through my veins, I felt a sense of desperation unlike anything I've ever experienced before. But despite my fear, there was also a part of me that felt exhilarated. For the first time in my life, I was truly experiencing the rush of running for my life. There was no turning back now, though, no matter how dangerous things might become. As I fled down the twisting streets, I realized that this moment would change me forever, that I would never be the same person that I was before. Somehow, I managed to beat that thing back to my house, and only when I was home, inside with the doors locked, did I begin to feel safe in any way. Later that day, in the blazing sun, I retrieved my bike. Still, it was the last time I ever did that route in the dark. As I said at the start of this, you can't be a paperboy and be scared of the dark. I never used to be, but now things have definitely changed.